Welcome back. This is episode 5 of this Babellion series in which we are reviewing Oscar-nominated movies. Today, I have co-host Gladia Boldt.
Hello.
And we are going to be reviewing Licorice Pizza.
Paul Thomas Anderson.
One of the greats.
True. I just was talking about this in the car with Titus and Caleb, but Magnolia, one of his early pictures, is one of my favorite films ever, and I talked about it on League of the Wings, plugging that, a year ago?
I think so.
On the roof.
I'm so bad at times.
I think a year ago.
Yeah.
But yes, I do love this man.
I think this is the first movie that I did see of him. So, yeah, I enjoyed it really well. So do you want to go over kind of what this movie is nominated for?
So it was nominated for original screenplay and directing. Paul Thomas Anderson for both of them, because he wrote and directed. And he also was one of the directors of photography.
I didn't realize that he was a director of photography as well.
I only saw it in the credits at the end. We were lucky we watched it in theaters at the Ritz in Philly. So we were able to see it on the big screen, which is how it's meant to be seen, I think. Yeah,
I don't remember the last time I saw a movie in theaters, but it's nice seeing to actually go to a theater and watch it in person. And this is not an extensive list at all. I thought they would be nominated for more, but with some of the other, I guess, first 4 movies that we went over, I just feel like it's been at least like 4 or 5 like nominated for just whatever, editing, screenplay. But this one is music.
And I would say that all of the categories, I mean, across the board, it was pretty phenomenal. I did enjoy it a lot, especially music. We were talking about the score earlier, but they had, like a jukebox, bunch of really great classic songs. I heard some Bowie, Life on Mars in there. And the entire theater, everyone was resonating with the soundtrack. You could hear people singing along a little bit.
Yeah, I really loved how they incorporated music and just like the soundtrack in general too, or like other score, like the piano, or just like that to build the atmosphere of just being within the 60s. I feel like they implemented sound in a way that kind of brought you back to that time. And with I keep blanking on Nightmare Alley. We saw kind of them flashing back to the time period it was in, with hearing stuff on the radio that kind of placed it within the time period. And you saw that within this movie with kind of the oil crisis that was happening within that time. And there was a couple other things, but just like seeing or stuff seen on TV, and of course just like the design as a whole.
Yeah, a lot of references. We had Lucille Ball, or a character like Lucille Ball, in there. And a lot of TV stars. I was saying some of the references went over my head because I wasn't alive during the time period, but I could tell that it was definitely a recall to that age. And it's reminiscent of other films where they go back to like the golden age, Hollywood, Los Angeles. Very alive, vibrant. And the music and the references and world built in a way that actually helped the story. It didn't take over.
I agree. Kind of bouncing off of that too, because this movie got some criticism for how Asian or just Asians were represented within this movie too, with how that one asshole of a character was mocking the accent of his quote unquote wives that he had at the time. And I remember you saying out like in the car ride, you remember hearing like the older generation that kind of grew up during that time like laugh at that, and Titus also came with us, and all 3 of us kind of felt uneasy with that kind of joke.
And it was cringy laughter, I was hoping, but as it went on and as that happened more than once, the laughter stopped sounding that way, and it started sounding a bit like they were actually enjoying it. I mean, the theater, I was saying, it was mostly when we walked in, it was mostly white, and a lot of them were older. And maybe it's a different... It was just uncomfortable. And I don't want to say that it's a different... pass it off as that, because there are many who are part of that generation who were not that way. I mean, the 60s and the Vietnam protests, and there was a lot of the hippie age that was happening, beatnik 50s. There was a lot of protest happening and a lot of progressive people who were expressing. So it was sort of a weird conservative recall, like back to the olden days, but not, it doesn't even represent the freedom of like Los Angeles. So it was a little strange.
Yeah, and I feel like as a whole, or just like the age that we are in right now, I feel like we've moved past that joke too, because I feel like a decade ago we've seen that joke or kind of behavior a lot, and I feel like it's still kind of mixed in within our culture, but I feel like as a whole we know generally that's not obviously a good thing to imitate any other race. But it was just weird seeing it, because I feel like we moved past that. And yeah, and even the director too, kind of his response when a reporter brought it up to him, he kind of dodged it, and it didn't really make sense to how he kind of responded to that reporter on it.
He didn't speak about really his intentions or why it was even placed there.
It was just like, yeah, sometimes I put stuff and it's like a hit or miss. And he was like, yeah, sometimes it's like not based on my intentions. And he never really said what his intentions were.
I think at one point he alluded in his interviews about it to it pointing out the racism that was existent at that time, because it certainly was. And you see it across the film. It's mostly white characters. And I think if you want to make a statement as a creative, you really have to make the statement. You can't half make a statement. And it didn't appear as a statement at all. It just appeared as something incidental, used as entertainment. And it wasn't entertainment. It was really weird to put twice a white man who the other white man in the scene mixes up the two women who are next to him, doing a really caricature voice, of course, and that was the extent of it. It was meant like everyone kind of laughed.
Yeah, I don't know why he put it in there twice. I agree with you. It just didn't add anything within the story, and it didn't, like, if he was trying to implement the racist or racism within that kind of time period, there is a bunch of ways that he could have done it.
A lot of anti-Asian sentiment and a lot of that has been perpetuated in Hollywood. Hollywood holds a lot of responsibility for that. So in this age, in this year, having had that history, to put it back up on screen and not be able to talk about it and not be kind of embarrassed about it, is kind of shameful, actually. So
I agree. And kind of switching the ties to another kind of a lot of criticism about this movie was also the age gap between the two characters, or the two characters. I'm so bad with names. I forget the characters' names.
Alana and
Gary. With the 10-year age gap.
Yes.
And 10-year age gap is a pretty big gap for any age, but it would be one thing if it was like a 40-year-old and a 50-year-old, but it was due to him being only 15 and her being 25, which I think kind of sparked a lot of criticism.
Absolutely.
But I think not. Okay, I just trying to think about how to phrase this too, because like I want to state first that like I think that age gap is it shouldn't exist at this time, but I also think that this movie got a lot of unnecessary not maybe unnecessary. It was aimed in the right direction, but I feel like it wasn't as bad as people were making it seem.
We went in sort of unprejudiced. We didn't read any reviews. We had few conversations about it. I generally don't like criticizing art that I've not seen, of course, because why would you do that? And I think the conversations were fair, but having seen it, it was not nearly what I was expecting, just because they were they treaded very carefully up until the end, I thought.
And I feel like what people need to realize too, this was a timepiece as well, and it was based in the 60s. And within that time, if you kind of go into that mindset of it being in the 60s, a 10 age gap, especially with a 15-year-old and a 25-year-old, within that time, I feel like I don't really know the general census of what people thought, like what, 60 years ago, but it was 60 years ago. And I feel like that's more common within that kind of time period to see a 15-year-old and a 25-year-old. And it's not like they were throughout the movie, it's not like they were portrayed with that much sexual, like,
yeah, it was sort of a tale of friendship in many ways.
Yeah, and I like how it kind of I felt it was kind of more of a high school relationship too. Yeah. And I feel like that's what you needed to do.
Paced very slowly. Yes.
And I feel like that's what you need to do with this kind of age gap thing, is to have a high school relationship perspective where kind of innocent. This innocent, holding hands, nervous to hold hands, yes. Like just kind of exploring that sexuality, because I feel like during that time of high school, that's kind of where you learn new things about yourself.
That's
and I feel like that's how they took it, rather than reverse of it, making it as an adult relationship where you have a solid idea of what your sexuality is, and and how to go about it, what's right, what's wrong, how just to go about it. And I thought they approached it very well.
Well, when people talk about coming of age, I have made fun of the term in the past because I always wonder what that means. But as far as those flicks go, I would say that it was achieved here, because Paul Thomas Anderson, what you just said about like sexuality, growing into your sexuality, sexual awakening, that kind of plot line that many of us do experience, I think it was because it was approached through that lens, rather than, as you said, like a very adult, abrasive, aggressive lens. It didn't feel quite as dramatic, because we've all, I mean, at least I have had crushes on people who are older when I was younger, and generally you hope that they don't act on it, that the older party is responsible, because it is usually not appropriate, and the age of consent is of course not 15 in the state of California, or any state, I hope. So, and Alana is, for the most part, she holds herself responsible for her actions. She talks to her sisters about it being weird, hanging out with 15-year-olds. So I was a little bit shocked at the end, because they were so careful to have her kiss him and say, "I love you." But even that, I think it was sort of done in an innocent way. The "I love you" felt friendly. They didn't have tons of chemistry, I would say. They had a lot of chemistry as actors, but not like sexual chemistry. It
was like kind of like a fleeting kiss, or like all of this like emotional tension built up throughout it. That, I feel like that's a good way to kind of conclude it, as simple like kiss. It wasn't like they were making out or kissing for a long extent of time. It was kind of, I don't know how long it was, but it felt pretty short.
Agreed, yeah.
And also another element of it as well, I thought that kind of those two personality types, I feel like people don't really look into those personality types as well too, because you have the girl coming from still living with her parents, still like doing photo shoots in high school. Kind of, I feel like she just reminds me of a girl who never really escaped her town, never really explored the outside world out of high school. I don't know if she went to college or not, but she seems like she kind of didn't go to college, or didn't experience the world outside of her hometown. And it just reminds me of like her being kind of trapped in high school, but within a 25-year-old body, but vice versa with Gary.
Absolutely.
He's more mature of his age, because I wanted to ask this question too, and I wanted to ask you on the air, not in the car too. but he's an actor as well. And I feel like as an actor, especially when you're starting out at a young age, you have to mature a lot faster just because of the industry that you're in. And I feel like he is a lot more mature for his age. I'm not saying like he still acts like a 15-year-old in ways, and the movie does portray that. And the girl, she does portray that she is 25, like she has the knowledge of a 25-year-old. But I was going to ask, like, how, since you have experience of acting at a young age, how has that kind of shaped your maturity level?
I think people are forced to grow up faster because you're supposed to, as soon as you step onto these sets and in those spaces, you have to show up with the kind of self-awareness of an adult, because you will get judged and you will hear about it. So if you don't show up as an adult, you open yourself up to criticism, essentially. So it's weird because you're absolutely right that they are sort of playing younger or older, opposite of their ages, and that's why they do work together as a pair. But then you also think that a 25-year-old still has to have the kind of responsibility to understand that this person was forced to grow up fast, and it's artificial. It's not real. The person is 15. He should not be running necessarily. He's making money for his parents, which is an interesting thing. In show business, they talk about child actors and the parents profiting off of their children and how ethical that is. And he's running these businesses at a young age, and his mother is accepting of Alana, and it's in part because his mother is allowing. I don't want to make too much of a comment on kids who are entertainers and their parents are supporting them, because sometimes it is okay. But if it's not done very carefully, it can turn into something where someone like Alana can be almost taking advantage of someone who's sort of been allowed to run around. His parents are never there. He says that. He's taking care of his 8-year-old brother, and his 8-year-old brother is in a car with him as they go down a hill and could die, falling off of a, cliff in Hollywood because they ran out of oil, That was not really a clear answer, but
no, it was very clear, and it brought really insight too, because I was going to kind of switch it to like, do we know about his dad? Because I feel like they were kind of portraying it as like a kind of a single mom kind of aspect.
I think that's what I gathered too.
Because like I was just going to add too, because I feel like talking to like friends and other people who have more of a single mom or single parent household, they have to kind of grow up a lot faster than a person who is has both of their moms. But yeah, it's just, I felt like I think the director, I'm so bad with names, but I think Paul did a good job in that aspect too. And I think that's why he didn't push any boundaries that were too far. Because I feel like you're going to make people uncomfortable with this topic or with this age gap. I feel like the uncomfortableness is almost impossible to escape.
Yeah.
But I think he did it in a way where it was time period, kind of them matching maturity levels, and also the girl approached it in a very mature way too. You alluded to this too, and she was in the very beginning, she was like, we can't date, we can't date, yes. we can't push this any further, but
yes,
but not at the same time, because she
showed up at that restaurant. I think the discomfort is a little, yes, it's inevitable, and I think he did try to skirt the edges of it carefully, but he even said early on that he was worried about the reception. He was proud of the film, but he was worried about it because he knew that it's a little bit, the whole story is pushed forward because she continues to take actions that almost endanger Gary a little bit. And even though she tries to be careful at times, there is that one moment where she gets angry because he's going out with a girl, or he's like having an intimate moment with a girl who is his age. And she goes up and she sees them for a moment, which is extremely invasive. And that was like, not skirting the edges carefully.
To kind of switch like the tide as well, because I don't want to make it sound like, he did an absolutely perfect job of representing this age gap and like kind of representing this age gap perfectly, because I mean, because I did want to get into it of how she kept pursuing Gary, and she didn't just in her position of her being that of 25. It's kind of like you said this before too earlier. It's her responsibility to kind of shut things down to not pursue this, even though she may have some feelings or initial feelings. It's her job to kind of stop it in its tracks. And I felt like she just didn't really
set some boundaries, which she never did, not once. Neither of them did.
Yes. And I think also manipulation, if you want to call it too. Or not. I was kind of going back and forth when I was watching flipping back and forth if this was manipulation or if it was kind of getting caught up in the moment and getting caught up in like the emotional aspects of it, because I can see it going both ways with manipulation of, oh, she's going to this guy and she knows that he's watching. Like it's multiple times, like with a few times, I think. Like
in the restaurant when he watches her flirt with and she tries to make him more jealous. And
then with Bradley Cooper too, or just like, maybe she didn't really play into those flirtatious acts by other men. But she didn't really deny them too. Because like she was kind of saying no to Bradley Cooper. I guess that was her denying that.
Definitely. He was harassing her.
Yeah. I guess that's not really a good example because I agree that was a harassment from his side and she couldn't really do anything to do that. But I'm blanking on kind of the scenarios of it too.
Well, there was the actor earlier who flew a motorcycle over a mound of fire on a golf course. That actor.
Yeah. And I'm just blanking on scenes too. But I'm pretty sure it happened with at least one other guy rather than him too.
Sean Penn was playing the William Holden-esque screen veteran character, Oldham.
But yeah, like within those regards, she kind of pushed boundaries. Like, why are you doing that too?
Sorry.
Oh wait, sorry. Who is it?
It was Sean Penn as William Holden. I can't say Oldham.
It's okay. But yeah, like within that aspect, like you can't manipulate or you can't like emotionally pull back and forth or pull a 15-year-old's emotions like that, because sure, he's mature for his age, but he's still a 15-year-old.
Yeah, he's gonna have the impulses and it is weird because a lot of those moments were maybe a commentary on the harassment that was occurring, especially affecting women. Because she is kind of forced into these uncomfortable situations, dragged along, not told that she can say no. He even says say yes to every single skill that agent brought up. Maybe that was Thomas Anderson was pointing that out because she is playing with his emotions, but also all of those men who she's interacting with are putting her in uncomfortable positions. So I don't know which of the two.
That's why I'm also like, is it manipulation or is like just the situation thrown at her?
Yeah. I don't know.
And how much if she's like playing into that, or if it's just playing, she got caught up within the situation. It's hard for her to get out of it too. And kind of flipping it too, I feel like there would be a lot more criticism too if it was flipped, if the genres was flipped, like if it was a 25-year-old man pursuing a 15-year-old girl, I feel like it would get a lot more criticism as well too.
Well, people talk about emotional maturing occurring, and this is again along the gender binary, but like allegedly men mature emotionally slower than women. So if that's the case, this is even more egregious in some ways because she's even older. And even though the 15-year-old seems mature because he's running things his own way, the impulsivity that keeps coming up it just shows that this boy he's a boy.
And I feel like the movie does a good job of kind of getting in the mind of who's the girl's character again. Sorry,
Lana. No, you're fine.
Lana. I'm just getting frustrated with myself because Lana, with myself with not remembering character's name, but Lana.
Alana, I think.
Lana?
Sorry.
this movie kind of, I feel like, flips back and forth of her wanting to get out of the relationship and stopping it, and her emotions taking over and kind of taking along. But I got engulfed with like the emotional or relationship aspect with like, oh, this is a normal relationship. I want them to like get together and actually do this too.
Because there's so much yearning and pining that's happening. And typically when we see that in music and film, whatever media, we want to follow that thread and let it happen, because it's like building. And you do forget who these people are and that it's not quite appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And I think the pacing on it, at least like editing wise, he did a very good job with that, because like right when I'm at like the highest peaks, they do something that remind me that they have an age gap, like with the truck when they were filling up gas tanks and the fan broke down and they were filling it up with gas, with like them acting like the gasolines were like like that
you're
scene.
Right. And that was definitely intentional. Because I think the filmmaker, I mean, he definitely knew that it's not okay.
Yeah, and that was like very childish behavior. And then on the flip side too, with it is Lana was like reacting to Gary not knowing information about the oil crisis, or not being worried about the oil crisis. Is like, how don't you know that? But like, if you put it in the perspective at age 15, I wouldn't know like the ins and outs. I might know like, oh, we're having oil crisis, like gas prices are up, but I wouldn't know like the ins and outs because I didn't really pay attention to that.
And also, is Gary in school? Yeah, Gary is in school, because we don't see him much, but he is at the beginning. But child actors, I mean, often there are laws to protect them, so they could only shoot a certain number of hours and they have to get tutoring. But it does seem like his education is taken because he's running a business. He spends most of his time like running that business, taking phone calls.
And and I guess like the one scene that I kind of felt off too was when he smoked a cigarette for the first time.
And she dared him to do it.
Yeah, I didn't really like that aspect, because like, you know that he's going to do it if she's like, oh, you're not going to do it. Like, obviously, like at that age, he's going to do it.
Prove himself, yeah. And then he ends up, the next scene, you see him smoking it because it makes him look cool.
Yeah, and
that was a big theme then, though. A lot of people were smoking cigarettes, but I don't know about at the age of 16.
Yeah, I feel like a lot more of younger people were smoking at that age though, because one, everyone was saying that doctors back it up and it's healthy for you, and two, I kind of compare it to this age with vaping and stuff. I feel like kids at 15 and 16 are starting vaping around that age, like at 15 and 16, or even younger too.
Growing up fast.
I agree. Do you have any other final notes?
I originally mixed up, I was worried that we'd gotten Gary that name wrong, because the producer who Bradley Cooper is playing is based on a real producer named Gary Gutzman. And Gary Gutzman is sort of an interesting guy. Well, people in The Guardian, they say that it's a wild-eyed cross between Charles Manson and Die Hard, like, executive, but it's actually a real person who was supposedly a nice guy. And Paul Thomas Anderson talks about wanting to play it up and make it more interesting. And he ends up creating this really creepy man who's extremely energetic, and Cooper really took on that role. I would like to, if we haven't said, like, the performances, we want to give kudos to them, because really charismatic people. Alana Haim, who's playing Alana, has just such a magnetic presence, and has such an emotionally reactive face. She's always reacting, and everyone is listening to each other, which is really unusual. So that was... Thank you.
Yeah, I did want to comment on the acting too and the performances, because I thought that was amazing acting. Yeah, I just really liked how the actors performed, and I wanted to mention that too. So I guess we should wrap this up. Yeah, really great movie, and I just thought that every aspect was very good.
Yes, and even with the things that we talked about being problematic, again, people make art knowing that we are allowed to criticize it. And Thomas Anderson knew that as well. And I still thought that he took risks, and he is playing with the rom-com genre in a way that worked. The scenes were really strong, the writing was really sharp, the dialogue was really witty, and it still felt very natural the whole time. It was obviously well directed. The pacing was really lovely. It moved at a clip, and it moved the entire time, and we were invested, and and there were so many funny moments that you brought up.
I agree.
The car.
Yeah. And I just feel like it was paced like a high school relationship too.
Yeah.
Like,
intention. There was some intention.
With just like how slow certain aspects was. But, I also wanted to comment on the scene too, like the scenic design as well. I commented on before, but I'm always amazed timepieces with this kind of implementing that because with cars and everything, costumes. And then two, I also wanted to comment on how the Himes family within that movie, they're all like actual siblings in real life. And I thought that was cool. Really interesting. I really love this kind of artist or musician kind of flooding Hollywood or movies with Dominic Fike with Euphoria and then Himes sisters and everything.
Very cool. Yeah.
And I thought it was a great movie. And yeah.
And also in the car, we talked briefly about Benny Safdie is playing Joel Sachs, who is this mayor who is running at that time. And we thought that was pretty impactful, that story. They did a really good job of building that fairly and very consciously. And we really liked the actor who was opposite him, who was playing his boyfriend or his partner.
Yeah, just wanted to comment on that too as well. And like with kind of going back with the age gap too, also like we're in the 60s and like basically you're not allowed to date another man or you're not allowed to be gay. Like basically gay rights at that time was like in the
mainstream.
Yeah, mainstream. And you have to kind of hide your relationship if you are in the mainstream. I agree. They paced that really well too. And the difficulties of having a relationship with another man or another woman too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I still think, as we said earlier, the film was very alive. I would like to talk to my grandparents about it actually, because they lived through that time and hear what they thought about the kudos to the time period and to the freedom of that time period and the growing dissent and protest that was happening. And there were some characters who were, I think, representing that. So that was well done.
I agree. I wish I was during that time or lived during that time so we can actually like comment it on, because I feel like we were kind of out of the loop with some of the jokes too.
Yeah, there are people laughing in the theater and I would laugh too because it makes it more enjoyable, but I wasn't quite sure about some of the references, which is good because I need to educate myself more on film anyway.
Me too. But yeah, this was a great movie.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience. I don't think I ever held this before, but I'm going to hold it now. And
heck yeah.
Bye.